Hey guys, how's it going? Jay Sensation here. Welcome back to the channel. With the patch coming up this Wednesday and the patch notes coming out tomorrow, which I will be doing a comprehensive review about the changes of that as well, I want to spend today just to do a quick set review of the cards. Initially, at the very beginning of the season, I went through all the new cards and rated them on a 1 through 5 star scale. And I just want to take this moment to reflect over the expansion, how the cards came out, and just maybe where I was right or wrong about certain cards. And just a quick review, the rating: 1 star is an unplayable pack filler, 2 stars bad or a meme card, 3 stars is a cool one of / a tier 2 kind of card, 4 stars is a tier 1 meta deck staple, and then 5 stars is a meta defining card. So let's begin. Starting off with the first set of cards, we have Vayne. Initially, I gave her a 4-star rating. However, I do think she is deserving of that 5-star meta-defining deck card kind of thing. And initially, I definitely underrated her a little bit. I knew she was strong, but I didn't realize the extent of how strong she was. I think Vayne is just super flexible in the sense that there are decks like the Rumble Vayne deck that can just play a 3-mana tumble turn after turn and apply a lot of pressure to your opponent. And then there's also decks that, just level Vayne really quickly. Or at least use the cost reduction and have the ability to just use a 2-mana 1-mana tumble super effective, which honestly was a lot of them. But initially I just didn't realize the scope and the ability for Vayne to just be so influential across the board, different regions, different decks, things like that. So I definitely think that she is deserving of that 5-star level. Now, Condemn, on the other hand, her champion cell, I do think I got pretty on the spot. It's not really the kind of card you want to really main deck in your deck, but if you do have a Vayne in play and in your hand, it is actually relatively easy to enable Condemn, because what's really cool about Condemn is you can put this on stack during the second attack, which is something I don't think I fully recognized. And you don't have to wait for that to resolve. So this plus like quick attackers to just act as like a 1-mana combat trick. It's actually super cool. If it was actually played a little bit more, I think this card could be ranked a little bit higher, but just because I don't think it actually made its way into very many decks, but having Vayne's Condemn as a secondary version was very good. So definitely like really interesting kind of card, maybe a 3-star even, but relatively close. Just I would leave it there given that people didn't really main deck this card very much. Next up, we have some of Vayne's support cards, and this is where I think I was definitely a little bit generous. I think Kind Heart Recruit definitely stood out a little bit more to me, and I do think that it made some play in the Jax Vayne deck, a deck where it definitely has a lot more equipped allies. But overall, Vayne herself, many of Vayne decks didn't actually play this card, and even to a similar point, Steadfast Elkin. But I think this card is still strong enough as a 1-drop, where I think and its variety in different sort of Vayne decks, whereas the 5-drop and the 4-drop, the Widowed Huntress, definitely didn't really hit the mark. I just assumed that if you played like a 5-mana, like a 4/4 tough challenger, that was good enough. But turns out that really wasn't the case. I think these two cards get demoted to a 2-star rating, but no, otherwise, I think that the overall view is okay-ish. I definitely was surprised that these two cards, I think, are deemed actually relatively slow or bad. Whereas Fast Steed Elnick, obviously just being a 1-drop, gives it a lot more leeway into ways of different decks, and just gaining tough itself just makes it quite a formidable 1-drop. But no, I wouldn't say like meta defining by any standard. Next up, Bloodcurse Harpy. Again, another card that I think is deserving of that 5-star standard. Just a completely dominant card in Vayne decks. Probably one of, if not the strongest card, second to Vayne herself, just because of its effect. This thing I definitely underrated. Its ability to die, come back at full health is just so powerful, especially because it already has Scout, just applies so much pressure. And of course, the added synergy where it just provides you a very fantastic tumble target with Vayne herself makes it just insane. It's super difficult to remove and applies a lot of pressure. Zealous Ranger Knight. Why did I give this a downward? I think I switched these. I think this is supposed to be a plus and this is supposed to be a minus. By the way, Zealous Ranger Knight, I don't think really saw much play apart from inside, again, specifically Jax Vayne. a lot of these Vayne decks again are just very they're a lot less all in on this equip archetype, whereas Jax being able to play the weapon masters definitely gives you access to a lot more equipped allies on board. So this being relegated a specific one deck, you know, maybe it's fine as a 3-star. But around the 2-3-star I think is appropriate. Faithful Watchdog, on the other hand, this is a card that I think definitely surprised me a little bit. I thought this card would be a lot stronger, but the more I sort of played around with it, I think maybe got a little bit more awkward, or maybe it's just not the strongest thing you can be doing in your deck. Like just playing a 1-mana 2/3 equip is surprisingly not that strong, given that it actually has a condition. If you play for 3 mana, it's obviously not even that great. So I think that's the part that I was underestimating a little bit. I thought the condition would be a little bit less taxing for the kind of archetype and speed that the deck wants to be playing at. But again, I think that very few decks with the Vayne actually manage to fit this card into their deck. So I think definitely a little bit lower than the 4-star, maybe the 2 or 3-star, similar to Zealous Ranger Knight itself. Fish Fight, on the other hand, I think I smacked that thing out of the park. When I saw this card initially, I definitely knew it was super strong. Just a one-way strike for 2 mana, especially given the condition that is sort of irrelevant given Vayne, was definitely a super strong card. So I'm glad I evaluated this one correctly. All right, next up, we have a few more cards. Legionnaire Charge, the 2 mana burst, draw ally with 5+ power or grow it to 5 power this round. I think I'm gonna say I'm around the most part. This card might be deserving of 2 stars if it weren't for Rumble Vayne being as prevalent as it was, because for the most part this card was used simply to tutor Rumble, and in other more or less meme decks it had some other niche cases, but I've never seen this card played to grow an ally to 5 power. So definitely a good tutor for Noxus, which, you know, tutor cards are just innately strong by themselves. And simply because Noxus also has Rumble, which is probably one of the most premium cards to draw on turn 5, just made this card a lot better than I think what it deserved to be. But otherwise, I think pretty on point with that. Brutal Skirmish, also pretty on point. A Noxus strike spell like this is just definitely super awkward. Comparatively, because you also have things like Bloody Business in the region. Rune Squire. This card was definitely, I think, good in terms of Reforged cards. I think this is definitely one of the best ones. However, I think Reforged as a all just wasn't that good. If Reforged was a better kind of archetype, I think this could easily be a 4-star card. But just given the fact that the archetype that it slotted in wasn't actually all that good, I think this card is, you know, hovers on 3 stars, maybe 4. It depends on how you rate it. If you rate it by the card itself, you know, I think this could be worthy of a 4-star just because it's just super good. But given the decks that run it weren't really the best, or Reforged itself wasn't really the focus of it, I think I'll stick to it. Athean Myths is the card that I think overrated slightly. Now it's funny to say that just because it's only at 3 stars, because I just thought a Golden Spatula for a 3/2 stat line was just decent enough when synergized with cards like Vayne. But it turns out that's not really the case. The Cathian Mirage, I was mostly correct, is mostly a sham. And the Golden Spatula itself, just a +3/+2 stat line without any keywords, definitely really didn't make the cut. Now, I gave this card a little bit more credit because I gave the Challenger card a little bit more credit. And so if the Challenger card plummets a bit, I can see this card plummeting down as well to maybe even a 1-star. This card might be that bad. Not sure. It's cool to generate in other regions, but I think you can say the same about a lot of other cards. Yeah, I think this could be a 1-star. And there's Golden Spatula, it's all its glory. No, 3 stars. Ugh, I got fooled. But Darkin Aegis, I think it was pretty on point. Every single Demacia deck, every single Vayne deck under the sun pretty much ran this card. And then Jarl, of course, just being a super solid card overall. I actually think Jarl is a little bit weaker than I expect him to be, but that didn't really lower the power level of Darkin Aegis at all. 5 stars overall for me. Next up, Wraith of Echoes, meme card. You know, this could be pack filler, but I think it's just so funny and so interesting by design that it's a meme card just because you could super build around this card. But overall, this card is super slow, doesn't really do much, and just very conditional. Now, Swinging Glaive, I think it's definitely not 1 star for sure. Maybe it's like 2 to 3 stars. And some people swear by this card. I still think this card is like just not that great. For like Silver Auction that was running this card, it's definitely very snowbally, especially if you A, can't remove the unit that it's on, or B, just don't really have much interaction to remove weapons overall. I think this card is definitely really low tempo, given the fact that it does cost 3 mana, whereas most other weapons I actually want to play cost 2 mana. So this card doesn't work with Vayne, and you have to spend pretty much a whole turn equipping it, especially if it's the early games. And if that unit immediately dies without generating a Lucky Strike, then you're losing a lot of tempo. I think overall, what I said about the card was spot on, but I think its power level and ability to snowball is definitely a lot stronger than I had initially imagined, especially because this also synergizes with the streaming cards like Grappling Hook, as well or specifically Grappling Hook, just because it's a one-way strike and you get the Lucky Find. Because it has a little bit more synergies within its regions, this card definitely, I think I rated a little bit too low. So between the 2 or 3 stars, but for me, really not anything more than that. Opulent Foyer, 2 stars. For the most part, I think I was correct about this card. It did see more play in like Gwen Vayne. Definitely when you have actual rallies in your deck, this card did shine a little bit more, but only specifically tied to, I think, the Gwen Vayne deck. Whereas, you know, the Cat Vayne, or the Cat Gwen, anything else, this card just is quite awkward when you want to be playing a harrowing deck. But overall, and like I've discovered, just playing the card, you really don't want to double draw this card, so it's fine as a one of, which might just be good enough as like a 3-star. But I think most decks just didn't really utilize this very well, and the card itself probably wasn't that powerful by its own. Even like the Hecarim decks didn't really play this card either, in the most part, especially when you got to like the Zed Hecarim decks. Moonlit Glenkeeper, on the other hand, I do think this card was definitely a very, very solid 5-star card. I don't think this card really popped off the way that you would expect a meta-defining card to really shine, in the same way, you know, that I think like Vayne or Seraphine were. But I think this card was secretly just a very, very powerful card. Saw play in a lot of different decks, in Nightfall and Control decks, in ephemeral decks, in aggressive decks. It just really fits the bill in pretty much any sort of archetype, and it just has a little bit of an engine slapped onto it. So very flexible and very powerful. Next up, Seraphine. I don't think anyone couldn't have seen this coming, but Seraphine was definitely very, very easy. 5 stars, maybe even surpassing expectations on the card. But high note, I think I definitely rated a little bit lower. I wouldn't say this card is 5 stars, just given the fact that, well, it does things that, you know, many other decks do, or many other cards do. But just given the fact that doubling with Seraphine, having as Seraphine's own champion spell, and it's just overall flexibility and play rate, this card is probably good enough for 4 stars. I'm not quite sure what I said in the past. Maybe I said it's redundancy, but I think a deck like Seraphine actually really appreciated the redundancy, which makes the card a little bit better, especially given the fact that Seraphine herself was super, super powerful. Now, Acorn, on the other hand, I think this card was still okay. It definitely wasn't as powerful, or not as comparable as a card like Shimon Winds, for example. So just by looking at this card, I definitely probably over compared it to that. Just a 1 mana 1/1 elusive that does something on Nexus Strike. However, I think that overall, this kind of cost reduction on spells itself is not as valuable, especially when you compare to a card like Green Glade Lookout that discounts units. Discounting units definitely stronger because, well, you can only play up to a certain amount of unit mana a turn, whereas spells, you can definitely curve those out earlier. And overall, I just wasn't super impressed by this card. Even if my opponent hit me like 2-3 times this card, if they didn't have like the right cards in hand, especially like Seraphine decks where you're playing a bunch of cheap spells, like discounts didn't really add up to all that much. So I wasn't super impressed by this card, but still solid card, you know, 3.5, 3, 4, somewhere in between. Next up, Crowd Pleaser Drum Solo Fan Club President. Crowd Pleaser, 2.5 stars maybe. I just round up to 3, but I think overall this was fine. I don't think a lot of decks actually played this card. I think it saw like some play in like the Demacia decks, and actually that's probably not true. But at the very beginning, I think it was experimented with a little bit. High level wise, I think it's fine, but it probably wasn't played that much. So I don't know. Maybe I was wrong about it. Maybe it's a 2 stars, but 2.53. I'll leave it in between because I think the card itself is still relatively powerful, especially when you generate, of course. Especially with Seraphine because it counts for 2. But I definitely expect this to actually be played, but it wasn't. So I'll just say I was wrong. I changed my mind right now. So I'm not gonna change the thumbs up, thumbs down, but for now, I think this card I might have been wrong about this card, a little bit weaker than I expected. Drum solo, staple card, definitely to be expected. And fan club president, another card that I think is deserving of 5 stars. Not sure why I underrated this card initially. Or maybe I was scared to like rate it at a certain point, but after having looked at the pool of cards that fan club president can generate, I think it's a lot easier to say how powerful this card is. Especially the fact that you have a decent like 1 in or like 3 in 10 to generate a card that heals when you're in a deck that runs no healing and healing that you can double up. So given the fact that you are allowed to do that and have access to a lot of really, really good cards that I probably didn't realize at the moment, easy 5 stars. Side plans, definitely on the weaker side, and especially as equipments when you already have Darkins competing for the slots of equipments. Card is definitely a little bit weaker. Saw some play in some Seraphine decks, and definitely not the worst card overall, but I don't think it saw enough play for me to really be super impressed by it. On Deep, on the other hand, I thought it could come in as a little bit of a board clear. I did recognize the fact that if you're getting to this card, you probably has more efficient ways of doing so, and I think given Seraphine just ability to just absolutely decimate boards, combined with the mana discount from Back Alley Bar, you really didn't need Zondiva. Now I won't say that after the changes Wednesday, this card is or equally as bad anymore, but overall, in this expansion, given the strength of Seraphine, this card definitely didn't shine. So for now, I'll say I'm wrong, but given that this card gives P&Z a kind of effect that they don't actually have, it's hard for this card to inherently be bad. It was just bad now because Seraphine just really outshined this card. Next up, got some missed cards. Witness. This card is actually good. I don't think anybody played it besides me, and I played in a very fringe spot, but I think this card is actually pretty low key as far as things go, because this can a 2-mana 3/3 stun an enemy is just super premium. And flow itself isn't very difficult to enable. It just didn't really see play in like Jin Annie, which I think was definitely a little bit more expected. But given the fact that if you don't actually flow, you can't really play for 4 mana when you have a stage hand and like the Hawk. But I think there's definitely other decks out there, especially as the later we go on, that will be able to utilize this card. Bruno Wuju, yeah, wasn't impressed by this card. Not a lot of people played it. Want to play this card, just play Deep Med. But some people, I saw in some decks, some people say it's okay. I don't really know what to think of it because I really haven't played it. But overall, I just don't expect this card to be super good. Unworthy Soul, on the other hand, I think was pretty strong. Definitely wasn't super breaking anything by any means, but definitely just a side grade to kind of willify anything. I actually didn't really get to see its effect go off or like destroys weapons, which I think I did rate it higher because of the fact. But I think having this condition as we get more and more weapons, it's not going to make the card even better. So I'm pretty on the spot for that. Dragon Collar, yeah, meme card. Moving on, Darkin Harp. I think I underrated this card a little bit. I don't think I underrated Shiratu. I don't think I underrated the Harp because of the Darkin, but I think I underrated this card because of its utility within the Scout decks, the Vayne Quinn, the P&Z deck, where they actually utilize this card a lot better with existing challengers like Quinn or cards like that, or even just like challengers overall. But just ability of granting quick attack to a unit, especially when you can just main deck challengers and then main deck this card itself, overall is very strong. And just having the ability to just be flexible as a Darkin, I think it's hard for that. There's a bottom line for how bad a card like this can be, and it probably wasn't deserving of 2 stars. Might bump it up to 3.5. Sun Bounce, on the other hand, I thought this card was low key. And yeah. Oh, it's flow. Did I realize this card has flow? I might have not realized. Actually, I'm not sure. There's no way I didn't realize. But I definitely thought this card was low key. Given the fact that once you play any new soul Seraphine, just automatically enable this. But I think when it comes to cards that you want to cheat mana with, Back Alley Bar was just the star of the show, right? And you just didn't need this card. As simple as it is. Back Alley Bar just gave you all the discounts you needed, and you didn't really need extra spell mana. And so this card just really didn't see any play, which is super surprising to me. All right, moving on. Darkin Harpoon. This card I probably underrated. I think its ability in itself is actually pretty powerful, just because you can play this with other regions to really gain value out of the card draw. Because there are regions out there that just lack card draw, like Demacia, Ionia, things like that, whatever it may be. And you have Darkin Harpoon, or I mean, even any deck just benefits from card draw, honestly. Fearsome Weapon, I think a lot of people have realized that is just super powerful, given the fact that a lot of Seraphine decks just don't really block it very well, and even the Vayne decks, you have to block some pretty good units into it. So Fearsome overall is very fantastic keyword. Card draw itself very good, and Iberos honestly not the worst card, because it comes down as like a 10 15 whatnot, and its conditions honestly not the easiest to even block. So this card's probably deserving of at least 3. Because Spirit, pretty right on spot. Scrappy Parts of Palooza, definitely a meme tier card for a meme tier deck. So moving on. Fracture was correct about it. Didn't see any play. Better cards. Warden of the Tribes, correct about it. You know, I'll give this 2 stars because I think it's a meme card. Just because, you know, I just to be consistent with how I've been rating meme cards overall. But Twilight Protector, also I think I was pretty spot on about this. Card doesn't do anything. Its Daybreak effect is too weak, and as a Nightfall card, well, honestly, into Nightfall decks, this card shouldn't be that bad. But I think its Daybreak effect was a little bit too weak, and the decks that it tries to support just don't really benefit too much from this card. So I don't think this card was ever that good. So 2 stars on swap. Varus, yeah, I think Varus is pretty on the dot. Not super meta defining by himself, although he is just a very fantastic card overall, especially because his spell is Chain of Corruption. They just work so well together. You draw 1 Varus, you inherently draw a 2nd Varus after playing 3 cultist spells, and then you get a nice combo with it. Not the strongest champion in this expansion, especially compared to Vayne as well as Seraphine, but still a very good champion, I think. And looking at his cards, Ambitious Cultist, definitely not that powerful. Blooming Cultist, probably, it was definitely better than Ambitious Cultist, although I think this still saw relatively little play. Aikido did make it work in this Varus kind of Nami deck that utilized as a tune a lot better. Saw a little bit more play, but definitely not that great. Brew Cultist was the one that probably surprised me the most. The decks that want to play this card just don't really play at this speed. I thought I could see more playing like a Plunder kind of archetype that had like the P&Z improvise or whatever it may be, but even that wasn't the case. ISO Cultist was definitely a meme tier card, and Lunari Cultist, I was the most wrong about this. This is probably easily like a 3 or 4 star card. Definitely the best one out of these 5. And yeah, I guess I just didn't realize at first. I'm not sure what happened. I just compared to Mountain Goat and I thought it'd be worse, but 2 gems guaranteed overall is actually probably pretty good, especially because it double dips with Varus. Going on to some of the other cultist cards, Expense Protect, you know, this could be 4 stars. It's just kind of hard. It's just not that kind of card you run 3 of in itself. So I think that's why I just gave it 3 stars. Just because I put as like good 1 of or like tier 2 card. But this card is definitely strong. So I'll give it a 3.5, bump it up half a star. Sudden Surge, 3 stars, pretty on point. This was definitely the least played card out of like this kind of series of cards. I think I did see it pick up a little bit of play in this like Zoe Teemo deck that came about in the very last week of this patch. But overall, definitely the weaker card of this kind of set of 5. Unending Wave, I think I was pretty on point with. This card was actually a little bit more awkward than I actually expected it to be. I didn't realize the fleeting would be as much of a downside as you want it to be, but especially because you run a card like Unforgiving Cold next to the Unending Wave. Unforgiving Cold is just not a card you want to give fleeting. And there's a lot, I think there's quite a few cards in this kind of Varus deck that you actually don't want to have as a fleeting draw, which I think made this card a little bit more awkward. But at the end of the day, 2 mana draw 2, just really hard to argue with. Now, Unforgiving Cold is actually a card that I'm going to bump up to a 5-star rating. Definitely the strongest, I think, card of all these cards. Because Varus itself just really aims to make use of the trading value. You have big units, you have big stats, you have big buffs, where this card just absolutely shuts it down. In the mirrors, especially given how popular Vayne was, this card is absolutely insane, and I think actually worth of that 5-star rating. Now, Violent Discord, on the other hand, I think I definitely overrated a little bit. I thought that decks like the Varus decks that didn't have access to a Mystic Shot could appreciate a Mystic Shot. But this card really only saw play in specifically Ezreal Seraphine, where it was more of an Ezreal level up kind of card than anything else. Still a solid card overall, but I give it a 3 stars rather than 4. And then lastly, maybe not last, I think we have one more after this. Camouflage Horror. The deck just, the kind of deck that just plays in, if there even is that kind of deck, just really didn't see play. Decks that, you know, like evolve, like kinds of things like that, are just a lot faster than this card really manages. So this card is probably just a 2-star card. Curse of the Tomb, though, I think I was pretty mostly on point with. Definitely saw a lot of play. Pretty staple card in overwhelm decks overall. Saw some combo play in like Seraphine decks. Pretty cool flexible card. You can play this to just as a predict, but also just as sort of a game-winning card. So pretty cool. Altar Blood, I'd bump up to 2 stars. Even maybe 2.5, because I think you can make some really funny things work with this card. Definitely really cool and too quite flavorful. And so I was definitely super harsh on this card. But that's the end of it. Overall, I think I got most of them right to a degree, maybe like plus half, minus half star sort of rating. What definitely surprised me, was there any card that super surprised me? Varus and Cultist, you know, I definitely overrated and I was a little bit shocked. But there wasn't like anything that super stood out as something that I just got completely wrong. You can argue Ichthian Myths, you know, was off by like 2 stars or so. Faithful Watchdog and some of the Vayne followers maybe I like slightly overrated. But overall, I think that it was I had a pretty good estimation of like what the patch sort of waned out to be. Pretty happy about that. I'm letting you guys know what you guys think of the expansion and maybe some of the changes you expect to see coming up this Wednesday. But thank you guys for tuning in. Catch you guys next time.